And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Twitter at coalition_radio, the original mothership at coalitionradio.us. We're recording this late in the evening, Friday, I guess it's February 26th. And we're immediately following the passage of legislation called the Equality Act. Now, this legislation was originally promoted, in 2019 as an add-on to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Joining me tonight is someone who is personally involved, if you will, in this legislation. She is an activist at the national level of the Libertarian movement, as well as the Libertarian Party itself, if you will, the small L and the big L. She is also the chair of an organization called Outright Libertarians, which will give her an opportunity to explain a little bit about, and arguably represents, if you will, the forefront of the libertarian conversation surrounding not just, as I traditionally call it, the LGBTQIA movement, but also the philosophy, the political considerations, as well as the civil rights of the trans community. She is, of course, none other than Ashley Shade. She's also, as you can see on screen, a candidate for the North Adams, Massachusetts City Council, and is involved in literally dozens of organizations promoting equity, promoting education, and promoting decency, if you will, in the relationship between people of literally every form of human sexuality. Ashley, thanks for joining us late here at night. We're doing a recording of this that we'll be sharing with people in the coming days. But let's talk a little bit about Outright and yourself. When did you get involved in Outright? And you've assumed the chairpersonship, if you will, of a critical organization within the libertarian community. Tell us just a little bit about yourself and Outright.
Yeah, so Outright Libertarians is an organization dedicated to our purpose is to represent the GSM, or gender and sexual minorities community, as we call the LGBTQ plus community. We use the acronym gender and sexual minorities, GSM for short. We use that acronym because it's more inclusive and you don't have to keep adding more letters. But essentially what Outright Libertarians' job is we bridge the gap between the LGBTQ or GSM community and the Libertarian Party. We also ensure that GSM people are heard throughout the party and that GSM issues are always at the forefront of the Libertarian movement. The Libertarian Party was founded in 1971, and one of the foundational pieces of our platform was legalization of gay marriage. And so GSM issues have always been important and a part of what we do here as libertarians. It's something that all libertarians believe in because we believe that all people should be able to live their lives how they choose, so long as they don't hurt other people.
You reflect on the historical underpinnings of the libertarian movement being a not just an acceptance, not just a profound respect, but, if you will, for a society that was so challenged by issues of sexuality in the early 70s, effectively one of the areas that you promote is the normalization, the incorporation, the let's just say the legitimacy of folks of all backgrounds in the greater community, the greater world community, something that seems so obvious now, but certainly wasn't, if you will, part of the political status quo in the 70s, was it?
No, not at all. And so libertarians have been leading this fight and leading this movement for equality, for the LGBTQ or GSM community to be a part of society. As libertarians, we believe that all people should be able to live their lives however they choose, love whomever they choose, and be their most authentic selves, so long as they're not out hurting anybody else.
Right.
And so that includes making sure that all marginalized people and communities have the right to believe in what they believe in and to live their lives how they choose without government interference and still be a part of our society. They belong
Hmm.
here too. We're all human beings.
Traditionally, I've been involved in a number of events here in the greater Providence, Rhode Island area, and there are times where, as you would call it now, the GSM community have met libertarians with, I'll call it a certain degree of hostility. There was sort of a little bit of a shock when folks in the libertarian community here started participating in really, I mean, community pride events, for example, as well as speaking to some of the issues facing the trans community at clubs and meeting spots. What, in your opinion, politically, it strikes me that the GSM political front, if you will, has always leaned Democratic, yet Democratic Party in terms of the duopoly, but has never really is it our fault for just not being good enough at publicizing our efforts? Is it why not a stronger acceptance of the libertarian movement? What are your thoughts on that?
There's a few factors that go into that, Pad. The first one is that we don't message well enough to the LGBTQ community. We don't do enough outreach, and we haven't over the years. Another issue is that we do have libertarians who come in, and there's this perception that libertarians are just right wing Republicans who like to smoke pot. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not the case. However, there is a perception that exists out there. And unfortunately, online, some of the louder voices do tend to be more conservative and tend to speak out against the GSM community. And so we have to fight that as well. It's part of our platform that bigotry is irrational and repugnant and does not have a place in our society. That is something that is at the foundation of what libertarians believe. It's part of our platform. We believe in the rights of everybody to live their lives how they choose. We believe that individuals have the right to choose how to live their lives. And so naturally, we should all be allies to the LGBTQ community. Unfortunately, sometimes we do find some people who come into the party who tend to not be allies, and they do speak out against us, and they do speak out against our rights to exist in society. And so the party has to do a better job, and the people in the party have to do a better job at calling out that bad behavior and making sure that we promote LGBTQ issues and people so that
Mm-hmm.
we can show the community that we truly do care about them and their issues, and we want to be a part of helping to improve their lives.
Right. And it should be noted that a significant percentage of our leadership team are in fact members of the GSM community, and I want to be careful when I say this. They weren't elected because of that, but I think it points to the, if you will, the acceptance of all lifestyles within our party. That was not an obstacle. That was not presented as a, if you will, in other parts of the duopoly, other parts of the Democratic and Republican Party, where it would be seen as an issue that has to be discussed. How do we frame it? How do we position it? How do we talk about it? In our organization, I believe we're reaching. We're not quite there, but I believe we're reaching I want to say a blindness to people's individual characteristics as they represent being part of the team. We've talked about trying to be colorblind as a society. I don't know what the right term is, but we're reaching a point where individuals are rising to positions of leadership, regardless of what lifestyle or what is part of their physical life, rather than that being something that would, if you will, disqualify them or lead to discussion. Do you think we're getting there as a movement? Are we there, or do we still have work to do?
I think there's always still work to do, and we are slowly getting there. I mean, this goes back to the great Dr. Martin Luther King, who had a dream that, one day his children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character.
Mm-hmm.
One good thing I can say about libertarians and for the most part, when it comes to these types of, electing people, putting people in positions, we do judge people by the content of their character and the actions that they actually take, and not based on their demographics, not based on their
Hmm.
sexual preferences, not based on their race or religion, but what they actually do and the work that they do and what they actually believe in, what their principles are.
Hmm.
That should be at the forefront of making decisions and putting people in places. And so, yes, we do have a majority. Our LNC, our Libertarian National Committee, is made up of a majority of women and LGBTQ identifying individuals, which is a wonderful thing. But they weren't elected because they were women and LGBTQ identifying individuals. They were
Right.
elected because they were qualified, because they were great activists and people, and because they had a plan to move our party forward. And so that's the real thing to look at when we're making these decisions. The fact that somebody is gay or bisexual or transgender, the fact that they're Christian or Jewish or Muslim, none of that should matter when taking into account somebody's qualifications for a job. What should matter is their principles and their actions and the work that they actually do for the people they're trying to represent.
Right. Yet sadly, that's not reflective of the overall society still, is it? And you travel a lot for a variety of organizations that you're involved in, you represent. Uh, there was always a tendency to believe that certain parts of the country were less tolerant than others. That really isn't true anymore either. It's really, is it? What do you think it's a reflection of? And are there still regional biases?
There definitely are still some regional biases, but you'll find hateful people wherever you go.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find accepting people wherever you go. I just took my first trip into the South for the first time in my life this past weekend. I was in Tennessee for
Right.
the Libertarian Tennessee Convention, and I was pleasantly happy and surprised with the reaction I got, not only from libertarians in the party, in the movement itself, but even outside of the convention space itself. I was well received and treated very kindly. And I was actually kind of surprised by that. But I do know that if I went into certain places in Tennessee, that would definitely not be the same reaction. And so I really think it depends on where you are in particular areas. Even here in Massachusetts, a state that's known for being liberal and progressive, there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of hidden racism here. There's a lot of, you hear about it sometimes in sports where, fans yell out the N word at athletes from the opposing teams. It's been brought up several times. There's kind of this, idea that progressive or liberal places are supposed to be less racist and
Mm-hmm.
less biased, but that's not always the case. And so you can find racism and hatred and bigotry anywhere. And so in some places, it is more prevalent than in others. But there are communities in pretty much every state where you can find some acceptance as well.
On a personal level, I mean, you're part of a prominent part of a political organization that has certainly had to take the unfair share of slings and arrows, if you will, from a failed establishment political regime. You represent the GSM community as far as the libertarian movement. How much pressure do you feel as a role model?
Well, I just try to be the best person that I can.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to be a role model. I'm not trying to be somebody that's idolized or looked up to. I just try to be a good human being.
Right.
I believe in compassion, education, and love as the foundation of everything that I do.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to listen to people and hear their ideas. I want to be able to educate people and talk to them about issues. But most of all, I want to be able to spread love throughout
Mm-hmm.
the community and reach the people and touch the people's lives that I get to interact with on a
Mm-hmm.
daily basis. And building those relationships and having those connections is the most important thing for me, and that's how I've been able to become somebody that is respected in the movement,
Mhm.
and that's the foundation of what I do. For me, again, it's all about building relationships, working with people, having the difficult conversations, being willing to listen, being
Mhm.
willing to educate, and being willing to love. I'm not out here to make enemies. I'm not out here to hate people. And even though people might hate me because I'm different, I don't hate anybody. As a
Mhm.
matter of fact, I hope those people that hate find peace, because that's how we end up getting to liberty. Uh, if we want to find the road to liberty, if we want to eventually get to a place where our society is set free, we have to let go of feelings of resentment and hate and anger, because those shackle us down. And
Right.
so when we have those kind of feelings, we're not free ourselves.
Mhm.
So by learning to love and let go of those angry feelings, that is how we actually help change and light the path to liberty. So I like to say that love is the brightest flame of liberty, because that's how we show people how to become free, is through love.
And in doing so, and I use the term role model as a positive, by the way, and in doing so, for younger people involved in politics, your ascension, if you will, into prominence within the libertarian movement, both nationally and at a local and hyperlocal level, I believe, with combined with that attitude, provide a real, well, let's just be blunt, a role model and a path to younger folks looking to get involved in politics who are part of the GSM community. It's, in one hand, I think you point out that there are now protections and civil rights and that have finally been accorded to members of the I'll call it the GSM community that, well, quite frankly, never should have been fought for. But at the same time, as those rights are finally recognized, not even accorded, let's just say recognized, inherent to all parts of the human condition, that does, in a sense, provoke outrage and hate from folks that would diminish you. And in doing so, your strength in standing up to them looms large for a community of folks who, particularly in the trans community, have been bullied, have been targeted, have been segmented, have been discriminated against, and often with very dire circumstances, particularly for young people who find themselves, who are trans. And so, to me, that's a form of congratulations, because, folks understand that if within the libertarian community, they can do the same thing with hard work. I don't know that's necessarily true elsewhere, obviously. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I hope what's happening is that the activism that you displayed in other folks in the libertarian movement who are part of Outrage, who are in the trans community, is a signal and a symbol and actually an invitation for other young people who are trying to live lives of individual freedom and self-determination to say, come on board, because quite frankly, not only are you welcome here, you're embraced, and we present to you all opportunities, if you so choose, for leadership. That's, as someone who's older than you, right? I'm older. That is a remarkable turnaround for someone who grew up in the New York City area in the 60s and 70s, in terms of both historical events and just the if you will, the social environment that existed for folks. I'm old enough to remember ACT UP demonstrations during the height of and I use the air quotes, the gay plague, which turned out to be HIV, which turned out to loom larger in significance to the straight community than was ever promulgated within the within the gay community. So I've lived through a lot of that and seen a lot of that firsthand, and I just want to make sure that folks understand how remarkable the liberty movement is because of the very things that you talk about and the opportunities that exist within that. So we come to a point in time now where the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which enshrined in law that which should be part of the human condition, that is the prevention of using race and other identifying issues or aspects of an individual against them in the workplace and government and
well, every other aspect of civil life, if you will, is finally being adopted, modified, looked at for, for the GSM community. What are your thoughts on this legislation? Are you happy with it 100%? You've read the legislation, which to your credit, most haven't. Most have gone to the Facebook School of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 class this week and feel completely entitled to debate it just after finishing the COVID era Facebook School of Epidemiology, which was sometime right after some other Facebook school of moral outrage. But what are your thoughts about the legislation?
Honestly, after looking through the legislation, I took the time to read the entire bill today. It clearly defines sex and includes protections for sexual orientation and gender identity, and it's something that's definitely needed at this point in our society, especially at a point where there are currently 22 active states trying to pass anti-transgender or anti-LGBTQ legislation, including things from keeping students from being able to participate in athletics to preventing medical treatment in any situation at all. And so people have a right to be part of the society. People have a right to be a part of what's happening in the world. And people have a right to live their lives. And it's important, it is imperative that the government not be allowed to discriminate. Uh, the government should never be allowed to cause harm to individuals. That's what we have a constitution for. That is why we have laws that prevent government discrimination. And so, every 100 years or so, the things get updated. And now it's been 50 years, and we're updating some more language to be more inclusive to prevent more discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing. Discrimination is bad, bigotry is bad, hatred and a lack of understanding of different people is a bad thing. This is not something that belongs in our society. Everybody deserves to have access to the market. Deserves to have access to be a part of the society. And if you're allowing states and governments to create legislation that excludes people, well, now what is the point of having a government to begin with?
Mm-hmm.
Government is supposed to be representative of their constituents, all of their constituents, even the ones who are different. And so, if government is creating legislation and laws that prevent people from being able to be themselves or be a part of the society, that should not be allowed to happen. And that's what's happening in large quantities over the past year or so, and especially has picked up in the past 6 months. And so I'm actually in favor of this bill. I wasn't sure if I would be when I first heard about it. I'm absolutely in favor of updating this. Not only am I in favor of updating the Equality Act, but because this kind of legislation can be changed depending on who's in office, I believe that it's necessary to have a constitutional amendment.
Mm-hmm. One of the most challenging aspects in terms of polite conversation in the libertarian movement is the whole conversation. I think it's now referred to as the bake that cake, but of course we're talking about freedom of association. So on one hand, there are those people out there who believe that the government shouldn't be involved at all in dictating freedom of association. Yet what you're pointing out quite aptly is actually a completely different logical process. And that is opposing a government that is in and of itself limiting freedom of association. And I'm taking that a significant part of your argument in favor of this is the fact that it would defeat governments in preventing freedom of association and access to the ordinary civil rights, if you will, or the civil activities as well of individuals. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. Why should the government in one state be able to say these type of people, well, because they're different, they can't have health care anymore. We're just going to block them from being able to access doctors. And if doctors want to refuse to treat them, they absolutely can and send them out the door. Where in the world should that ever be acceptable? It shouldn't. When we're talking about, let's get into the conversation here, the one that everybody's talking about, athletics. Okay, I understand the arguments. I do. I used to be an athlete. I played football for many years before I transitioned. And I can tell you that being an athlete was very important to me, and participating in sports was very important to me. I learned a lot of character. I learned a lot of skills in being an athlete and participating in sports. But let's talk about where this is really coming down to. Schools are funded by governments, and governments are not allowed to discriminate. So, government funding, sports, everybody should have the right to play. Everybody should have the right to play. Period. Now, when you're talking about a private sports league, there are guidelines set up by the International Olympic Committee that discuss and have been medically accepted when it comes to transgender athletes, specifically transgender women like myself. And those guidelines are fair and valid and have been established by the medical community. And those private sports leagues should have every right to decide who's going to participate and what those rules are. But when you're talking about government funded sports programs, which is what schools are, there should be no discrimination. Everybody should be allowed to play. And let's get back down to the most important part. Here's what we're not understanding. Here's what I don't hear in the conversation. It's supposed to be student athlete, not athlete student. These are students. They are children. They are people who are learning first and playing athletics second. And they should have every right to participate in their athletics. They should have every right. Here's the other side of the argument as well. If you have states preventing young people from getting medical treatment to transition, now not only are you denying them the access to actually be able to compete fairly, but then on top of it, you're going to deny them from being able to compete. So now you're putting them in the position where they can't compete fairly because they can't get access to the medical treatment they need to do so. And you're saying, well, you can't compete at all either. How is that okay? Where would that ever be okay for the government to decide that? It should never be okay. And that's what's happening in a lot of states right now. Government is trying to decide who should be able to participate and who shouldn't. Government is trying to decide how students should live their lives. And government is trying to decide who should have access to what medical treatment. That is at the core issue of what we are seeing in these bills. And that is never acceptable. The government should never be allowed to decide who deserves what health care. The government should never be able to decide what kind of participation students should have in schools, that the government should never be able to discriminate against students, period. These are government-funded schools. The government represents all people. Why would we ever think it's okay to allow a government to discriminate against their students? It baffles me that anybody would be in favor of that. And so this act is going to prevent government discrimination throughout the United States. And that is a good thing.
The roles that folks play in these governmental organizations, and let's talk about the United States military. Obviously, it was a huge playing card to cultural conservatives during the Trump administration that they would not allow folks in who are considered trans. Why the obsession? I guess this is what I don't get. Whether it be in the military, whether it be in sports, whether it be particularly, and I guess we'll get eventually to the much heralded, much vaunted bathroom issue. But why are cultural conservatives so obsessed with how other people lead their lives? And I ask you because for me, it's sort of it's not a transformative question. I haven't felt the sting of that discrimination personally. So I can't fully give voice to perhaps what you may think their motivating factor is. Is it fear? Is it ignorance? What is it?
It's a combination of many things. Hatred is a learned behavior, right? We're not born to hate people. We're not born to dislike people. We are taught to hate. We are taught to dislike. And part of that comes with our natural experiences and what happens throughout our lives and our interactions with certain people. The other part comes from who we surround ourselves with. And if our parents taught us to hate, then we'll likely hate too. There's a lot of misinformation and a lot of miseducation out there on transgender issues, on transgender healthcare, on what it means to be transgender. And so many people don't understand. They've never actually, there are many people who've never even met somebody who's transgender. They've never taken the time to have a conversation with somebody who's transgender, never thought to understand why somebody could be transgender or what that means or what their life experiences are like. They just hear the collective crowd that they're part of say transgender bad, and so they jump on board. Transgender bad. It's not bad to be different. It's not bad to live life differently. And here's where we have the issue. You can disagree with somebody's lifestyle. I may disagree with somebody's religion if it drives them to dislike me for being who I am. And that's okay. But when you get to the point where you're now advocating against me being able to live my life or me being able to participate in society, now we've got a problem. Now you're using your own personal beliefs to cause harm and prevent others from being a part of the society. That's not okay. That's never okay. And so the libertarian view is that everybody should be able to live their lives however they choose, as long as they're not hurting other people. And you can disagree with somebody's lifestyle without actively trying to support legislation or support ideas that keep them from being part of the society. And that's where we need to get to. And it takes having conversations with people. It takes a lot of education. There's so much misinformation out there. It's very sad. It's very unfortunate. But it really takes just taking the time to have a conversation with somebody who you normally wouldn't have a conversation with and being willing to listen to something new. Unfortunately, not everybody's willing to do that. And unfortunately, not every setting is appropriate to do that in. But I would urge anybody who has anti-trans ideas, anti-transgender thoughts, anti-transgender a view of the world. And I would say, have you ever met somebody who's transgender? Have you ever had a conversation with one of us? Have you ever talked to us about why our lives are different or why we choose to be who we are? And it's not really even a choice for many of us. For many of us, it becomes a life or death situation. We either accept that this is part of who we are, or we aren't able to function in the society any longer. And it comes down to being willing to have those conversations, being willing to listen, being willing to stop and say, am I hurting somebody else just because I disagree with their ideas or thoughts? And if the answer is yes, stop. Stop hurting people.
An important part of our statement of principles, our philosophy, actually our entire approach to life as libertarians, is understanding that the use of force and coercion, even through a nonviolent political process, is in fact an act of violence in and of itself. Why? I'm always trying to phrase this the right way because I want to make sure I make the right point. Folks talk about gender roles as if that it's something you can, well, I mean, literally, it's just as simple as a case of changing clothes. Yet, and I know I'm getting personal here, but I hope you can try and shed some light when you talk about gender to someone who is transitioning. You mentioned yourself just now, it literally being an issue of life or death in some cases. Can you try and give voice to that to promote some level of understanding to folks who look at this and I won't even dignify with how some of them characterize it by repeating it, but I think you know where I'm going.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're talking about. I can definitely give an example with myself. I came out back in 2014 as a transgender woman, and I've been living my life as a woman ever since publicly. As a child, I always knew I was different. I always felt different, but I was never able to come to terms with that myself. I was never able to express myself the way I always felt I should. And so that, coupled with many other things, led me to a very unhappy childhood. It led me to a very difficult life. And it eventually got to a point after my football playing was over, which, ended up being my outlet to expressing my feelings. Football is where I was able to get everything out that I internalized and never shared with anybody. But what it came down to is, I found myself in a position where I ended up in a hospital, in a situation where I should have died. And I woke up the next day and left the hospital, and I said, what is happening in my life that would drive me to get to this point? Why am I so unhappy? Why am I so miserable? And so I took the time to explore these feelings that I've always had, that I've just buried deep within myself and just tried to suppress and hide, because I was afraid that I would never be accepted in society. I was afraid that by being myself or expressing any of these feelings, that I would be ostracized and never be allowed to live a life that would be fulfilling. And it got to the point where I knew I had to accept this part of myself. I knew that I had to accept who I was, or that I would no longer want to continue living. I would no
Mm-hmm.
longer want to continue being alive. And that's what it comes down to for many of us. We being transgender is like being imprisoned in your own body, where you are trapped and you are stuck and you are a prisoner to something that just does not feel right. And medical studies have shown that the brain waves and brain lengths of transgender people match their gender identity. My brain is very female in thought, in action, um, and it always has been. So to hide that part of myself and try to present as something that I thought I had to be, that society expected me to be, was soul crushing. And being able to finally come out and be myself and tell my truth and live my life the way I always saw myself was the most libertarian and most freeing experience of my life. It takes so much energy, it takes so much to finally come to terms with yourself and say, this is who I am, and this is who I'm going to be for the rest of my life. And I'm going to be this person, whether anybody likes it or not. That is a freeing, liberating feeling that nobody could ever take away from me. And I allowed myself to become free. And it was either allow myself to be free and be who I am, or stop living altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad I was able to make the right choice.
And we make that journey all the more difficult for people who it just must seem so hard to, by enabling government to, again, as so often happens, be that soul crushing, that obstacle to fulfilling one's own personal destiny, by that self-ownership. And self-ownership, for folks who aren't libertarian, it's a concept you need to understand, because once you gain acceptance and understanding of that, you will be whether you like it or not, you will be a libertarian, because it's for young people in particular. And you were addressing this as a young person, and you had an outlet, and there was some positivity in your life as a result of that. But how many young people do we lose because of society and government's failure to provide safeguards and/or acceptance?
Yeah, so suicide rate among transgender people is at 40%.
Wow.
And I'm lucky I survived twice. Um, so I'm here, and I probably shouldn't be. And there are many others who aren't here because they are so afraid to be a part of the society. They're afraid to express who they are because there are people actively out there trying to prevent them from living their lives, from being a part of society, from being human. We are human beings, not a subsection of humanity. We bleed, we love, we care, we cry, we laugh, just like everybody else does. There's no difference there. We're just human beings who want to be able to live our lives and express ourselves in the way that is most comfortable for ourselves. We just want to do what we do. We want to be a part of society. I want to be able to work. I want to be able to have a family. I want to be able to visit my friends and have fun. And I want to be able to help people.
You know,
That's
there
what I
was
want out of life.
a friend of mine once said to me, at that point moment in her life, she was involved in a civil union with another young woman, and they'd had a little child, and to her it was simply being able to go to work, and it's fascinating to me because this is perhaps one of the most simplest acts of display of family love that we can do, which is wherever you work, wherever you spend your day, putting up a handful of photos on your desk that show, well, the pictures that every family has of picnics with your little baby, or going to church, or playing at sports, or the normal things of life. And she said until the Civil Rights Act, if you will, that type of legal status was finally achieved in Massachusetts, that she couldn't do that. There was an existential threat against her in terms of violence, workplace discrimination, all of that. Now, the fundamental question is, of course, as libertarians, we shy away from legislation that does anything. Why, that we shy away from governmental involvement at all, even at times when it can promote acceptance. How, to folks who believe that somehow this will happen, that folks will be free of governmental violence, that folks will be free of all these intrusions in their lives, how do you reconcile those two things? Because there's a significant part of the movement that is troubled by anything that affects the freedom of association. What would you say to them?
Well, there's a few things. When you look at a bill like this doesn't solve all of the issues. It doesn't. It's not the end all be all. But what it's going to do is it's going to prevent government from discriminating. It's going to prevent state governments and local governments from discriminating against people. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a good thing. We should see that as a good thing. But it's not the end all be all. What we have to do in society is have conversations and educate people and teach them that we should respect and love all people, regardless of their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their race, religion, whatever it is that makes them different. It does matter that people are different, but it shouldn't. What should matter is that they're good people, that they have good principles, that they are good people in our society. The character of somebody and their actions should drive how we think about others, not what they believe in personally, not what their race is, or their religion, or their partner. None of that should really matter. We need to learn how to accept each other for who we are and move forward as humanity. And so often we lose sight of the humanity of people. Now, in many cases, I'm against adding new legislation for government to take over and pass a new law. And again, in this case, this particular law is going to fight against government discrimination. It's going to prevent governments and government agencies and government funded programs from being able to discriminate. And that is a really important step. When it comes to freedom of association, this is what I think. Are you trying to cause harm to somebody? Are you preventing them from being able to participate in the society? If the answer is yes, then that's not very libertarian. As a matter of fact, I could argue that trying to cause somebody harm and keep them from participating in the society is anti-free market and is a violation of the NAP, the non-aggression principle. We're not supposed to be trying to hurt people. We're not supposed to prevent people from being a part of the market. If they're not a part of the market, if they're not a part of the society, is our market free? Is our society free? The answer is no. Liberty is for everybody. Everybody should have the right and the natural born, at birthright, to be who they are, love whomever they wish to love, express themselves as who their most authentic selves are, and as long as they're not harming another person, trying to actively hurt somebody else, they should be allowed to do that, and they have the right to do that. And so, if what you're saying is that I have the right to cause you harm and keep you out of society, the answer is no, you don't have the right to hurt others. Your rights end when you use them to harm other people.
There's even a darker side to this. And, you know, it's interesting. There was I guess it was kind of a humorous backlash a few years ago when there was a pizza restaurant somewhere that made the bold statement that they would refuse to serve folks who were part of the GSM community, part of the gay community. They would absolutely refuse to serve their wedding. At which point, a whole number of folks observed that, quite frankly, they weren't interested at all ever in having these people serve pizza at their wedding. And so many older folks I know, more to my age in the GSM community, found great humor and solace in that, because it was a wonderfully innocent way to have a comeuppance, if you will. Is that word still used, comeuppance? So, flashing forward, though, the darker side of this is this seemingly endless obsession that folks who are in the cultural conservative community have with the prospects of folks invading their bathrooms. I don't get it. I'm not afraid of other people being in the bathroom with me as an adult male. I find it confounding at times, but as darkly humorous as I find it, it's not funny at all. The fact that people would harbor the notion that somehow transitioning or being trans is somehow an equivalent to some form of dark sexual violence. What are your thoughts on this? Why? How do we defeat it? How do we tell people just to stop it? What's the reality of all this?
Yeah, let's be honest, Pat. You don't hear news stories of a transgender person walking into a bathroom and assaulting people. It doesn't happen.
Right.
We go to the bathroom for the same reason anybody else does. I just gotta pee. Okay? Now, look, there's this theory that predators will pretend to be transgender and use that as a way to get advantages to be predators. But guess what? Those are not transgender people. Those are men who are perverted and they're doing something terrible and they should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. That has nothing to do with actually being transgender.
Right.
So stop trying to penalize people for who they are. Stop trying to penalize people for something that doesn't happen just because you have a perverted mind and you think everybody's a predator. I mean, quite frankly, that just sounds like these men have their own issues with thinking that other men are predators. And we live in a society where many men, unfortunately, are predators. And because men know this, because they know their behavior is so terrible, they project that transgender people are going to have the same type of terrible behavior. But guess what? I'm just like any other woman. I go to the bathroom to pee. I'm not there to do anything else. I just want to use the toilet. I gotta go to the bathroom. I gotta go to the bathroom.
You want to get in?
Do
You want to get
want?
out?
Yeah.
Oh. Right. That's great. It really is at this point just a question of simple human decency, isn't it?
Beings. Come back to the point where we see each other as human beings.
Right.
Come back to the point where we can be compassionate and love each other as humans. Stop treating people who are different. Stop treating them as if they're less than human. Stop looking at them as if they're somehow inferior to yourself or your own beliefs. Believe whatever you want to believe in. Have whatever religious practices you want, but don't use your religion, don't use your beliefs to try to keep other people down. Don't use your religious ideas, don't use your own ideas to try to prevent other people from living their best lives and causing them harm.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's really all about. Don't hurt other people. Just live our lives. Let others live their lives. Don't use government and don't use force to hurt others. Don't advocate for things that hurt others. Let's all just be one human race and live together. And if we concentrated more on being human and focused more on our humanity, think of how much further society would progress if all of our energy was put into things that helped humanity and helped us become better people instead of arguing about who's using the toilet.
Well, I just got a couple minutes to go. If I ask this question all the time when folks come on shows with me, and I think you actually already beat me to the punch when I normally would ask, what would you say to people if you had them all lined up in front of you? I think you just did it. On the predictive side, I'm not sure where this legislation stands, but like most political acts, it's generated acts of rhetorical violence, if you will, in terms of using speech to discriminate and demean. At the same time, though, when I think about the conversation you just led me through, I think it also has the opportunity to ennoble people and to promote understanding. And I think you've done a wonderful job of that tonight, and I certainly appreciate that. The question, obviously, how does you get people to listen? How do you get people to have an honest conversation without it devolving into just the madness that often inhabits social media or the dark corners of our minds? Do you have any predictions? I mean, not just of the bill passing, because that's very often legislation passing, I should say, excuse me, is really just a harbinger. It's that canary in the coal mine. It may or may not have impact because that's the nature of legislation. But where do you think we are, and how much more is it going to take to get a level of acceptance for folks, particularly in the trans community, that is happening at an accelerated, maybe because it's an earlier pace in the GSM community. And I look at my daughters and I look at their friends, And, the term colorblind often is used to describe people who are not racist. I haven't come up with a good equivalent for folks when it comes to who are, they are just beyond even that they've reached that magic moment where to them, someone's sexuality is not a cause for celebration because of acceptance, but they've reached that next level where it's completely irrelevant, which is, I believe, the ultimate goal, right? I mean, is to look upon people whose sexual preference might be different than yours in the same way. I don't know, that maybe you look at people whose hair color is different or not even really thinking about it. Do you think we're there? Do you think we're even close to there yet? How far do we have to go?
We have a long way to go. We have a lot of education that needs to happen for that to happen. And I think among young people, it's starting to happen more and more. But I would say what we need to do to get to that point, and I think the word you're looking for is humanity.
Mm-hmm.
We need to look beyond the differences and just look at each other as human beings. And again, as Dr. King had said, the content of our character, our actions, our words, our behaviors, those should be the driving forces, not who we are as people, not what we believe in religiously, not the color of our skin. Those factors should not have anything to do with it. It's your actions, it's your character as a human being that we should look at. Who you decide to love, love whoever you want. What gender are you? It doesn't matter what's in your pants. It doesn't matter what's in my pants. Nobody needs to know that information. I ain't trying to have sex with anybody today, so it's none of your business. And that's what it comes down to. Just treating human beings like human beings. Treating men and women equally means just treating everybody like human beings and not having these preconceived notions that this person or that person is better or worse because of this or that, or because of whatever it is that you don't like. It's really about, is this person somebody who does good things? Are they kind to others? Those are the kind of people I want to surround myself. Those are the kind of people I want to be a part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think that most of us would want other people in our lives to be the same. And again, just take a moment to think, is what I'm saying advocating for harm? Is what I'm doing hurting somebody? If the answer is yes, stop. And remember, there are human beings and human lives at stake. And again, I want to go back to what I said in the beginning about a constitutional upgrade. The Constitution is a tool that is supposed to be used to harness government. And like any good tool, tools need to be updated. Tools need to have upgrades. Tools need to be sharpened. We need to update the language in our own Constitution. Our Constitution should say that all people are created equal instead of all men. We've evolved beyond that. I think we can all agree that all people are created equal. The Constitution should say that. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to update the Constitution of the United States of America to say that. But because people treat it as this absolutely ancient idea, this absolutely almost like biblical document, rather than the tool it's supposed to be to harness government, it doesn't do its job anymore. It
Right.
doesn't harness government anymore because we never upgraded the tool. And so we need to look at those kinds of things. We need to reevaluate what a constitution is, what government is, what it's supposed to do. Government is supposed to represent people. It's supposed to create a semblance of rules that people follow so that if something happens, there are consequences for hurting people, essentially. So when we think about what role the government plays in our lives, and many libertarians will say, well, we don't need any government at all. And the reason they say that is because government usually causes more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, government is actually restricting other governments from hurting us. And that's why this piece of legislation is important. That's why I'm in favor of this legislation. And that's why libertarians should be in favor of it too. Because if the government is going to exist, it should absolutely be its responsibility to prevent other government and other government intervention from hurting individuals. So that's where we're at.
All right. Well, you've been on a number of our shows over the last couple of years. You know how we always like to end. Shameless self-promotion. How can folks find out about your campaign? How can they reach out to you in a variety of aspects? Your role as a Libertarian, your role as the chair of the Outright Libertarians, your role as candidate. How can folks find Ashley Shade?
Yeah, so you can find me online for my city council campaign, ashleyshade.com. You can find Outright Libertarians on Facebook at Outright USA. You can find me on social media for my campaigns on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. It is ashade4, number 4 office. Mm-hmm. And you can reach out to me anytime. I'd love to talk to people. I'd love to answer your questions. And I'd like to make a special announcement right now since I'm plugging myself.
Sure.
Next month, March 20th, the Massachusetts Libertarian Convention. I am going to be a candidate for our state committee, and I'm looking to help increase and help our state of Massachusetts build the Libertarian Party here. So I will be running for state committee here in Massachusetts to be a member of that and help increase the Libertarian message here in the great state, or the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for joining us tonight on our inaugural late Friday night run here. I think we're going to start to call this the Coalition After Hours, where we can have folks with conversations about mature subjects, about subjects that are perhaps a little bit more challenging than even some of the issues that we discussed during the week. So you're, I believe, our inaugural guest for this, and thanks for joining us tonight. And thanks for extending yourself in a manner that not everyone is either capable or willing to do. To really to explain, if you will, issues that are so deeply personal, yet you are brave enough to take them out to the body politic. And quite frankly, we need more people in our movement like you who are willing to turn that face out to the public and challenge, if you will, what the duopoly would, and a particularly vicious form of government would inflict upon us as societal norms, when I just simply refuse to accept the notion that there are government-dictated societal norms. Not their job. It's the job of the individual. And it's the job of other individuals to respect individuals in their personal choices. And you've done a great job of illuminating that tonight. So thank you very, very much. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Well, we're at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and, well, just about everywhere else in the thousands of media platforms that have popped up seemingly everywhere, like tribbles, in the endless array in the period of post-zucking. So reach out to us. Folks, we'll be back on the air Tuesday night unless there's some form of national emergency. But from Tuesdays to Fridays, from about 7 at night on well into the evening, we've got a variety of shows. Everything from folks who are physically challenged, their access. We've got a couple of new restaurant shows coming up. We've got golf, and we've got some awfully intense perspectives on politics. Folks, have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you soon. Good night.